Number 3. Andy Fowler. In the spring of 1983, Andy Fowler was 28 years old. He was living with his girlfriend, Betty Prater, in a mobile home in Pearl River, Louisiana. On the night of March 21st, 1983, Fowler was out drinking. He came home and he found Prater kissing 48-year-old Ricky Fontenot. Fowler slapped Prater and ordered Fontenot to get out of the mobile home. Fontenot went out to his vehicle and picked up a shotgun. According to Prater, Fowler went out and started fighting with Fontenot. A police officer, who was working undercover, was living in the trailer park and he watched the fight. He said that he saw Fowler and another man kick Fontenot while he was on the ground. Even when it was obvious that Fontenot wasn't breathing, they kept kicking him. The officer said he didn't break up the fight because he didn't want to blow his cover. Fontenot was taken to the hospital, but he died a short time later from internal bleeding. Fowler and Prater's son, Hubert Niedlinger Jr., were arrested and charged with second-degree murder. They went to trial in January 1984. Fowler testified that Niedlinger was not involved in the fight and he never came out of the trailer. He also said that Fontenot was the one who threw the first punch. Niedlinger was acquitted. Fowler was found guilty of manslaughter and he was sentenced to 16 years in a state prison. In the spring of 1989, just over 5 years into his sentence, Fowler applied for parole. Fowler was a model inmate and he was part of the Jackson Barracks Work Release Program. The program was for prisoners who were nearing their release date and who were trying to get paroled. In May 1989, the parole board denied Fowler's request for parole. He was told he would be allowed to apply again in 3 years. A few weeks later, on June 16th, as part of the work release program, Fowler and 9 other inmates were doing work at the Louisiana National Guard's Camp Villeray in Slidell, Louisiana. When the crew was finishing up for the day, the guard who was watching them realized that Fowler was missing. A manhunt was conducted, but Fowler wasn't found. Investigators heard several rumors as to how Fowler got away from the work release program. One inmate said that someone picked him up in their car. Another inmate said that Fowler stole a car. One inmate even said that he heard that Fowler was killed by another inmate and his body was buried. But these leads turned up nothing. The FBI was brought in to track down Fowler, but they found no clues as to where he might have gone. Then on April 11, 2014, nearly 25 years after Fowler escaped, a man living in Sam's, Alabama, who called himself Eddie Hill, was arrested for driving under the influence. He was fingerprinted, and the prints were entered into a national database. When they were entered into the database, they were matched to Andy Fowler's fingerprints. On May 16th, Eddie Hill, aka Andy Fowler, was pulled over while driving home, and he was arrested. Fowler's friends and family were completely shocked that he had escaped from prison after he had been convicted of beating a man to death. Most people had never seen him get angry. His common-law wife of 16 years and her son, who was a police officer, had no idea he was a wanted fugitive. Fowler and his common-law wife split up just a few months before he was arrested. His ex said that their breakup had nothing to do with anything Fowler did. They had just grown apart. With the benefit of hindsight, Fowler's ex and his friends realized that his oddities made a lot more sense. For example, he would never talk about his past. His ex said that he would simply shut down if anyone asked him about his life before he moved to Alabama. He only told people that he was born in Amarillo, Texas, and he said he grew up in orphanages and foster care. He only had one piece of government ID. It was a Texas driver's license. It expired in 1989, and he refused to get a new license. Fowler worked for several companies as a surveyor before he started his own surveying business. He only dealt in cash, and he had nothing registered in his name. His cell phone, car, residence, and even his business were registered under his ex-common-law wife's name. Another oddity that his ex noticed was that he didn't sleep much. While she did notice odd things about him, she, just like everyone else who knew him, never assumed he was a wanted fugitive. Notably, he was never uneasy around law enforcement. He and his stepson, who was a police officer, had a close relationship. His ex-common-law wife thought he might have had bad credit or he owed back taxes. Fowler had a social security number that belonged to Eddie Hill, who died in Washington, D.C. 2 months before he escaped. It's not known how Fowler got the social security number. The FBI was surprised that Fowler was able to stay on the lam for 24 years and 11 months. Fowler could go long stretches without drinking alcohol, but when he did drink, he became gregarious and sometimes he was flat out obnoxious. The FBI said that people who drink frequently and get obnoxious tend to have run-ins with the law. But Fowler, who was 59 when he was recaptured, never had any problems with the law until he was arrested for driving under the influence in April 2014. After he was recaptured, Fowler was sent to the Elaine Hunt Correctional Center, a medium security prison in St. Gabriel, Louisiana. He was expected to serve out the remainder of his sentence, which was 10 years, plus any time that would be added on for his escape. But at the time of this video, which was recorded 5 years after he was recaptured, Andy Fowler is out on parole. Number 2. Frederick Barrett. Carlo Ardolino was born in 1944 in West Long Branch, New Jersey. He attended university for a year, but then he decided to join his family business, a monument company. Ardolino was a craftsman who carved and sanded stone. In 1968, when Ardolino was 23, he was in a horrible car accident. Ardolino was the passenger in a sports car that collided with a tree, and he was slammed into the windshield. He had to undergo a 3-hour emergency surgery. For nearly 3 weeks, he was in critical condition. He eventually stabilized, but he was in the hospital for several months afterward. By 1971, Ardolino was healthy again. He was muscular and he enjoyed weightlifting. He had also been promoted to salesman at his family's monument company. Every February, his family business closed down for the month. In February 1971, Ardolino, who was 26, decided that he was going to drive down to Florida for a 3-week vacation. His father said it was the first vacation he ever went on. Ardolino set off from West Long Branch in his brand new 1971 Pontiac Firebird on February 7th. A few days after he left, his parents received a postcard from him that was mailed from Petersburg, Virginia, on the day after he left. After that, his family didn't hear from him, and they became worried. They ended up reporting him missing. Nearly 2 weeks after Arleno left for his vacation, his car was found in Merced County, California, which is about 2,750 miles away from Petersburg. The car didn't have any clues regarding Arleno's whereabouts. Arleno lived with his parents, and in the mail, they started to receive credit card receipts for purchases that were made after he went missing. The signature on the receipts was not Arleno's. They gave the receipts to the police. The police quickly realized that the receipts led to Merced, California, where Arleno's car had been found. After some investigating, on April 28, 1971, the police arrested 2 men for stealing Arleno's car and for transporting it over state lines. They were 19-year-old Frederick Barrett and 20-year-old Michael Owensby. It wasn't long before Owensby started talking. Owensby said that he, Barrett, and their friend, 19-year-old Charlotte Tabor, were going to a drug rehab center in Hollywood, Florida. Their car broke down in Nebraska, so they started hitchhiking. They crossed paths with Arleno in Petersburg, and he agreed to give them a ride to Florida. As they were getting closer to Winter Garden, Florida, Arleno was driving, and Owensby was in the passenger seat. Tabor was sitting behind Arleno, and Barrett was beside her. Suddenly, Barrett put his headband around Arleno's neck and started strangling him. Owensby said he grabbed the steering wheel and pulled the car onto the shoulder. When they were on the shoulder, the engine died. Owensby got out of the car and he ran to the driver's side. Using the handle of a knife, he started hitting Arleno in the head. He also hit Arleno's hands as he tried to pull the headband away from his throat. After a few minutes, Barrett stopped strangling Arleno and he pulled his unconscious body out of the car. Owensby said that he and Barrett picked up Arleno and carried him to a water-filled ditch. Owensby then claimed that he went back to the car where Tabor was waiting. He saw Barrett holding Arleno's head underwater with his knee jammed into his back. Then Barrett got up and jumped on Arleno's head several times. He then went back to drowning Arleno by holding his head under the water and jamming his knee into his back. After Arleno was dead, they tried to drive off in his car, but it had become stuck in the mud, so they had to call a tow truck to get them moving again. Owensby then told the FBI where they could find Arleno's body. Police officers in Florida found his body partially submerged in a ditch a few hours after Barrett and Owensby were arrested. Around the same time that the body was found, Charlotte Tabor was arrested in Hollywood, Florida, where she was working as a waitress. Owensby and Tabor made deals to testify against Barrett at his trial in September 1971. Tabor testified that Barrett and Owensby wanted to steal Arleno's car. Before Owensby had moved into the front seat, he and Barrett sat in the back seat and made plans on how to steal the car. She said she had nothing to do with the murder and was just a witness. In exchange for her testimony, Tabor was allowed to plead guilty to being an accessory after the fact. Her sentence was not made public. Owensby was allowed to plead guilty to second-degree murder, and he was given 20 years of prison. The district attorney wanted Barrett to get the death penalty, but instead, he was sentenced to life in prison. Barrett had a tough time in jail. While Barrett was awaiting trial, he got into a fight with his cellmate, and he slashed his cellmate 13 times with a razor. On the day that he was transferred from the county jail to the state prison, he got into a fight with two of his cellmates. A jailer had a tooth knocked out while he was breaking up the fight. In September 1975, Barrett escaped from prison, but he was arrested a short time later. In May 1977, he tried to escape again, but he was caught before he left the grounds of the prison. 7 months later, he escaped again. But just like his first escape, he was recaptured after a few hours. For his 2 escapes and 1 attempted escape, he was given a sentence of 46 years. He was then transferred to the Union Correctional Institution in Rayford, Florida. On the night of August 16, 1979, about 8 years into his sentence, Barrett and 2 other inmates managed to get into the prison's electrical room. They were able to turn off the lights at one part of the perimeter. At 12:50 a.m., guards saw 3 men running away from the prison in the area where the lights were down. Warning shots were fired above their heads, and one of the men stopped running and dropped to the ground. The other 2 men got away. A headcount was performed, and they realized that 28-year-old Frederick Barrett was one of the escapees. The other man who escaped was 28-year-old Willie Griffith. Griffith had been convicted of killing a 56-year-old cab driver in April 1976. After they disabled the lights, the men were back in their dormitory. They climbed through a vent in the dormitory, and then they scaled 3 fences that were lined with barbed wire. There was a statewide manhunt for Griffith and Barrett, but neither man was found. Griffith stayed on the lam for 11 years. Then a man in Florida read an article about escaped convicts. One of the convicts discussed in the article was Willie Griffith. The man decided to put his computer skills to use. He searched databases for activity on Griffith's social security number. He found out that the social security number had been used in California. The man passed the information on to the U.S. Marshal Service, and they started looking for Griffith. He was arrested in January 1991 in Halliday, Utah. After his escape, Griffith got married, and his wife gave birth to 2 children. His family had no idea he was a fugitive. While he was on the lam, he had been involved in the sale of drugs, but 3 years before his recapture, he had gone clean. After Griffith was recaptured, he was sent back to Florida to serve his sentence of 25 years to life. Griffith didn't know where Barrett went after they escaped, so Barrett's whereabouts continued to be a mystery. The search for Frederick Barrett didn't start in earnest until December 2009. That's when the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and the State Department of Corrections launched a campaign called 12 Days of Fugitives. Every day for 12 days, they profiled an escaped prisoner who was still on the lam. The 12th escapee they profiled was Frederick Barrett. After the campaign, the U.S. Marshal Service started to investigate where Barrett might be living. They did not explain how they got on his trail, but they learned that he was using the name Neil Meltzer. Using public records and databases, they found out that he had lived in Hawaii, California, Tennessee, and Maryland. But since the mid-1990s, he had been living in Colorado. The Marshal Service tracked him down to an isolated cabin on a dirt road in Montrose County. The closest city was an hour's drive. During the winter, The only way to reach the cabin was on a snowmobile or by using snowshoes. In July 2011, U.S. Marshals surrounded the cabin. Several of the marshals were dressed like U.S. Forest Service firefighters. They asked Barrett to step outside to talk about fire safety. When he stepped outside the cabin, they identified him because of a tattoo on his hand. Barrett, who was 60, was arrested after 32 years on the lam without incident. One of the arresting marshals said that the emotion drained from his face when he was arrested. Barrett's cabin was makeshift, but it had 2 stories, and it was attached to a camper. It had plywood floors, a wood-burning oven, and he got his electricity from a generator. The marshals said that the cabin was very clean and tidy. There was evidence that someone else was coming and going from the cabin, but they thought that Barrett lived alone in the remote cabin. The marshals weren't really sure when he started living in the cabin, but they thought he'd been living there for at least 17 years. The police found some guns in the cabin and a small marijuana patch near the cabin. Barrett was expected to face charges for possession of the weapons and for growing the marijuana, in addition to charges stemming from his escape, but that did not happen. He was just sent back to Florida to serve out his life sentence. He did not have to face any charges regarding his escape that led to his 32 years on the lam, nor did he face charges for possession of weapons or for growing the marijuana. Barrett is currently incarcerated at the Cross City Correctional Institute. Number 1. Margo Freshwater. Margo Freshwater was born on June 4, 1948, in Columbus, Ohio. When she was 17 and still in high school, she became pregnant. The young man who impregnated her wasn't happy that she was pregnant, and he didn't want to be involved with the child's life. Freshwater was deeply upset about the situation, and she attempted suicide. She gave birth to a son in early 1966, and she put him up for adoption. After she put the baby up for adoption, she started dating a man named Alfred Shirth. In the summer of 1966, Shirth was arrested for armed robbery in Memphis, Tennessee. Freshwater traveled to Memphis to hire a lawyer for him. She somehow got in contact with a 38-year-old lawyer named Glenn Nash. Nash had schizophrenia, and when Freshwater met him, he was losing his grip on reality. He was also drinking heavily, and this didn't help his mental condition. When Freshwater met him, Nash was being investigated by the Memphis Bar Association. Instead of coming up with a defense for Shirth, Nash and Freshwater came up with an unusual plan to free him. They were going to smuggle guns into the courtroom and help him escape. But that plan never came to fruition. Instead, Freshwater and Nash became romantically involved, and they forgot about Shirth. When they started the affair, Nash was married with 2 children. As 1966 went on, Nash's paranoia got worse. He was convinced that the Bar Association was always watching him, and they had agents everywhere. For reasons that were never explained, Nash and Freshwater set off on a multi-state crime spree. It started on December 6, 1966. Before they even left Memphis, they stopped off at a liquor store where 60-year-old Hillman Robbins Sr. was working. Several people heard gunshots and saw Nash and Freshwater run from the store. The police were called, and they found Robbins dead in the back of the store. His wrists had been bound with rope, and he had been shot 5 times in the head with 2 different caliber guns. Nash and Freshwater had cleaned out the register before fleeing. After the deadly robbery, Freshwater and Nash drove about 25 miles to Olive Branch, Mississippi, and they checked into a motel where they had sex. 12 days later, they were in Oakland Park, Florida, and they robbed a convenience store. During the robbery, 45-year-old Esther Bouye, who was an employee at the convenience store, was shot to death. On December 27, 1966, 9 days after Bouye was killed, Nash and Freshwater had to abandon their car on the side of the highway near Millington, Tennessee. They called a cab, and 56-year-old C.C. Surratt of Millington picked them up, and he drove them to Walls, Mississippi. Instead of paying their fare, Nash shot Surratt twice in the head. There were witnesses around, and they called the police. Surratt was found slumped over the steering wheel of his cab, and he was taken to the hospital. But sadly, he died a few hours later. The police talked to people who were in the area of the shooting, and they said they saw a man and a woman running across a field not far from the cab. Bloodhounds were brought in, and they tracked the scent of Nash and Freshwater to the highway. Freshwater and Nash had flagged down a truck, and they got in. The police tracked down the truck driver, and he said they dropped them off at the bus station in Clarksdale, Mississippi. The police learned that the couple described by the witnesses and the truck driver boarded a bus heading to Greenville, Mississippi. Nash and Freshwater were arrested after they got off the bus in Greenville. When they were arrested, Freshwater gave several false names before she finally told the police her real name. After they were arrested for the murder of C.C. Surratt, the police began to suspect that Nash and Glenn may have also killed Hillman Robbins Sr. and Esther Bouye. The police found Nash's car abandoned on the side of the highway. In the trunk, they found some shells that matched bullets from Robbins' murder. They also found some rope that was similar to the rope used to tie up Robbins. As for the murder of Esther Bouye, Nash's fingerprints were matched to fingerprints that were found at the crime scene. But Nash never faced charges regarding the 3 murders. Because of his mental condition, he was deemed incompetent to stand trial. He was sent for treatment at a psychiatric hospital. Margo Freshwater went to trial twice for being an accessory after the fact in the murder of C.C. Surratt. Freshwater claimed she was not a willing accomplice. She did what Nash wanted because he threatened to kill her. Both trials resulted in a hung jury, and they decided not to try her a 3rd time. Authorities in Oakland Park did not want to charge Freshwater with the murder of Esther Bouye because they didn't have any physical evidence that she was involved in the murder. But Freshwater was charged with first-degree murder in the killing of Hillman Robbins Sr. She went to trial in early 1969. As she did at her previous trials, Freshwater said she was never a willing participant in the crime spree. She said she was a captive, and she did what Nash told her to do out of fear for her life. She swore that she did not kill anyone. The district attorney said that Robbins was shot with 2 different guns, and this suggests that there were 2 shooters. Freshwater said that Nash used 2 guns in the murder as a way to control her. If she went to the police, then he would tell them that she shot Robbins. The district attorney had several witnesses who testified that Freshwater had plenty of chances to escape or to call the police. For example, one time she was in a store for 30 minutes trying on clothes, and Nash waited for her out in front of the store. The DA also pointed out that just hours after the murder of Robbins, she and Nash had sex. On February 6, 1969, Margo Freshwater was found guilty of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to 99 years in prison. She was sent to the Tennessee State Prison for Women in Nashville. On October 4, 1970, just over a year and a half into her sentence, Freshwater and another prisoner were being escorted by a single unarmed guard. Freshwater and the other inmate made a run for it. Instead of chasing after them, the guard went to get help. Freshwater and the other inmate climbed a 10-foot-tall fence that was topped with barbed wire, and then they ran from the prison grounds. A few days later, Freshwater's fellow escapee was arrested, but Freshwater herself wasn't located. Investigators learned that Freshwater ran to a nearby road and caught a ride with a truck driver who drove her to Baltimore, Maryland. But they didn't know what happened to her after she got to Baltimore. One tip they received from her fellow escapee is that she may have been using the name Tanya. But other than that, investigators didn't have much information to go on. 10 years after Freshwater escaped, she still had not been found. A newspaper asked Glenn Nash where she might be. Nash said she probably married a trucker, and she is the best damn wife anybody ever had, and is completely buried in obscurity and children. In 1983, Nash was released from the psychiatric hospital, and he moved to West Memphis, Arkansas. He stayed out of trouble and lived a quiet life. In 1984, Margo Freshwater's family had her declared dead. The authorities were not as convinced as her family that she was dead. Freshwater's case was reopened in 1993 when America's Most Wanted started production on a segment about her. The producers of the show asked the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Identification for information on the case. Special Agent Greg Costas looked through the file, and he became fascinated with the case. Freshwater's segment on America's Most Wanted aired in 1994, and Costas followed up on several leads, but he didn't find Freshwater. Costa then assumed that Freshwater was dead. Then in March 2002, the television program Unsolved Mysteries got in contact with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation because they wanted to do a segment on Freshwater. Special Agent Greg Elliott was in charge of the case, and he collected information to pass on to the producers of the show. Elliott then discussed the case with a computer analyst. The analyst suggested searching a police database using Freshwater's possible aliases and her birthday. Elliott figured he had nothing to lose, so he did a search for Tanya, who was born on June 4, 1948. Amazingly, he got a hit. A woman named Tanya McCarter had the same date of birth. She lived in Worthington, Ohio, a suburb of Columbus, which is Freshwater's hometown. Elliott wasn't sure if Tanya McCarter was Margo Freshwater, because why would Freshwater risk hiding out in her hometown? But he still thought that it was worth checking out. Elliott got in touch with Special Agent Greg Costa and told him what he found. Costa pulled up Tanya McCarter's driver's license photo, and he was shocked. Tanya looked a lot like Freshwater. He emailed the photo to Elliott. When Elliott compared the driver's license photo to the last photo they had of Freshwater, he thought he was looking at a mother and daughter. Costa then checked Tanya's employee records. Between 1966 and 1970, she didn't work. During that time, Freshwater was incarcerated. Costas and Elliot trailed Tanya McCarter, and they became convinced that she was Margo Freshwater. On May 19, 2002, Costa, Elliot, and a stakeout team watched Tanya, looking for a good time to arrest her. That morning, Tanya McCarter, who was 53 years old, her husband, Daryl McCarter, her son from a previous marriage, Timothy Huggins, his fiancée, Casey, and their baby all went out for breakfast. Then they went to a health club to swim. As they were walking out of the health club, Costas and Elliot approached them. Tanya was carrying her grandchild. They asked her if she was Tanya McCarter, and she said yes. Then they told her they had reasons to believe she was not who she said she was, and she was under arrest. Her husband Daryl and her son Timothy thought it was some type of joke. They even laughed. Tanya did not laugh. She handed the baby to her son's fiancée. She then hugged her family members and said she was afraid that this day would come. Tanya McCarter was fingerprinted, and her prints were compared to Freshwater's fingerprints. They were a match. After 32 years on the lam, Margo Freshwater was in custody. She was then able to give details of what happened during her life on the lam. After breaking out of prison, the trucker gave her a ride to Baltimore. She then took a train to Ashland, Ohio, and settled there. She used the name Tanya Myers. She eventually got a new social security number and a driver's license under her new name. She got a job as a waitress, and she lived in a boarding house. When Freshwater escaped from prison, she was pregnant. Freshwater didn't reveal the identity of the father, but the theory is that a prison guard was the father. While in Ashland, she met a man named Philip Zimmerman, and they started dating. She gave birth to a son 9 months after she broke out of prison. Freshwater stayed with Zimmerman for 7 years, and then they split up. Then she met Glenn Huggins. They got married, and she had 2 more children with him. At times, Freshwater worked 2 jobs to help provide for her family. But she made sure dinner was on the table every night, and she was always around to do things, like drive her kids to their Little League games. In 1998, her husband Glenn died from cancer. Freshwater decided to move back to her hometown, Columbus. She got a job at an insurance company that was about 4 miles from her childhood home. She eventually moved to an apartment that was about 10 miles away from where she grew up. Only twice did she run into people from her old life. One time she saw her aunt at a flea market, and another time she came across a woman she knew in high school. Neither woman recognized her. In 1998, Freshwater met Daryl McCarter through a telephone dating service. For their first date, they met at a McDonald's. Then for their second date, they went ballroom dancing, which was one of Freshwater's favorite hobbies. Within months, they were married. Daryl was a long-haul trucker. Not long after getting married, Freshwater quit her job at the insurance company, and she joined Daryl on his long hauls. Together, they traveled all over the country. During her time on the lam, Freshwater never contacted anyone from her old life. She also stayed out of trouble, so she was never arrested and fingerprinted. This is how she remained on the lam for 32 years. Her friends and family, including her 3 children and 7 grandchildren, were shocked to find out that she was a wanted fugitive. She told them that she was a naive and vulnerable girl who was taken advantage of by an older lawyer. She also said that she wasn't the same person that she was when she was 18. After she was recaptured, she was sent to the Tennessee State Prison for Women, which is the same prison she escaped from. She spent about 9 years in prison, and then in May 2011, her murder conviction was overturned. While Glenn Nash was in jail before he was found incompetent to stand trial, he had a cellmate named Johnny Boggs. Boggs had written a 4-page letter that said that Nash had told him that he alone killed Hillman Robbins Sr. The district attorney only gave 1 page of the letter to Freshwater's defense lawyer. The Court of Appeals decided that had the jury known about Boggs' letter, they may have viewed Freshwater differently. So her 1969 murder conviction was overturned, and she was given a new trial. In October 2011, Freshwater entered a best interest guilty plea. This allowed her to plead guilty while maintaining her innocence. She would also be credited with time served. In total, she had spent about 12.5 years in prison. While she was awaiting her trials and after her conviction but before her escape, she spent about 3.5 years in prison, and then she served 9 years after she was recaptured. A few days after Margo Freshwater entered her plea, she was released on time served and for good behavior. Thanks a lot for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos just like it. Also, please go to criminallylisted.com where you can suggest cases, buy merch, and find out about an exclusive podcast. Well, that's all for today. Thank you again for watching.